context of the U.S. primarily with the focus on the individual, you have a worldview from your life and your career. We'd love to hear your comments on solidarity.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. Like Stientje, I'd like to say this is such a wonderful opportunity to come together and talk about solidarity, for heaven's sake. And with all due credit to what was perhaps missed in the reimagining, I think even the title reimagining in and of itself is absolutely important and critical, and it's fundamental to what I understand by solidarity. One of the things Stientje highlighted is this emphasis on people and planet. Now, I don't know how many of you remember that in 2015, the United Nations had come up with 193 countries agreed to the Sustainable Development Goals Agenda, Agenda 2030, 5 main principles which include people, planet, prosperity, etc. So we were already talking before COVID about that critical intersectionality between us as people, human beings as a main focus, but while ensuring that there is a fundamental intersectional solidarity with planet, with prosperity, etc., etc. So the awareness was there. 193 governments, for heaven's sake, agreed to it. Now, you all know that one government doesn't always agree to anything, so 193 agreeing was a big deal because people were like, what's the big deal about it? SDGs, Agenda 20, 193 governments agreed to it. That's a big enough deal. And then, wham, right? 5 years later, COVID, and we're all stuck at home for 1 year and more. And one of the many things about COVID that we reflect on is it didn't distinguish between different individuals or nations or races or genders. It was with all of us. We were all actually rendered rather equal. Now, we're not equal in terms of wealth or in every other distinction, but in terms of succumbing to that infection, we were all very much equal, and we were all very much vulnerable. Then we come to vaccines developed in a record amount of time. Few people remember that the vaccine was developed in a record amount of time because we had SARS some years ago, and that began a process of trying to find a vaccine. So therefore, COVID accelerated an existing process. But the point here about solidarity is that we didn't think, because SARS happened somewhere else, far away from the centers of power in the world, when actually it was equally terrible, and it led to a lot of deaths. But what it took COVID, which impacted on all of us, to make that realization that, wait a minute, none of us is actually safe until everyone is safe. So it was this moment when WHO head said, folks, this is the reality. None of us is safe until everyone is safe. And I think that's the key thing about solidarity. The understanding that both Stientje and Shelley spoke to, that we actually depend on one another. We can't do it on our own individually, no matter how wealthy we are. But that in and of itself, ironically, isn't enough. That awareness that we're actually all interdependent and we all need to be okay isn't enough. So what does it take? It takes a leap of faith. And I think solidarity is about multiple leaps of faith, where you have to realize and take that leap, knowing that you're not going to be, there's no certainty, there's no security. It's not safe. There's no sense of security. Nevertheless, you give. Nevertheless, you serve. And that's the lesson that working with different faith communities actually teaches. That every faith is about not just oneself, but the giving to the other. Every faith, from the indigenous diversity of faiths all the way to the Catholic Church and His Holiness Pope Francis, talk about and insist on the importance of giving to others. And they tell us this magic formula of solidarity, which is when you give, you receive. And that's why we need to give. So it's almost a selfish idea if you think about it. I need to give because I'm really looking forward to receiving, right? But you give because you don't know where you're going to get it from, but you know, and that's the faith. That's the leap of faith. That's the solidarity. That knowing, not knowing what's going to happen and where it's going to come from, but you give anyway, you serve anyway, because it will come back in many different ways. And I think that is what a leap of faith requires to make solidarity possible.
Well, thank you